Courage is contagious, and we want to see it spread like wildfire in our nation. Welcome back to the Gold Report, where we inspire you to be 10% more courageous in your daily life. I'm so glad you're here. Please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll be right back.
Do you feel like the healthcare system is failing you? That's because it is, working exactly as intended to prioritize profits, bureaucracy, and big pharma, while leaving you and your family vulnerable when you need care the most. We understand your frustration. You've been asked to trust a system that feels rushed, impersonal, and biased. You deserve better. That's why we created Gold Care. Here, your values matter, your choices matter, and most importantly, you matter. Gold Care is more than a solution. It's a revolution. Trusted by over 10,000 members nationwide, we've built a system that puts your wellness first. With ethical, independent doctors who work for you, not the system, you'll have access to care that's transparent, trustworthy, and aligned with your values. We understand that stepping away from the familiar can feel daunting, but staying in a system that doesn't truly serve you is even harder. That's why Gold Care offers a healthcare alternative designed to work for you. Whether you're ready to step away from the system entirely or prefer to keep your insurance while seeking the transparent care, ethical doctors, and education you deserve, it's time to stop trusting a system that's failed you. Take control of your health with Gold Care. Join today for just $10 a month and become part of the healthcare revolution. Gold Care, built for you, powered by freedom, trusted by thousands.
Dr. Michael Kirk Moore, a respected 59-year-old physician and former Navy flight surgeon from Utah, faced up to 35 years in prison, not for harming patients, but for honoring his oath to do no harm. With informed parental consent, he administered saline instead of COVID vaccines to children and adults facing coercive mandates that threaten their jobs, education, military service, and even life-saving medical transplants. Dr. Moore acted out of compassion and ethics, not criminal intent, obviously. He treated patients free of charge during the COVID crisis, he made house calls, and he stood by those whose medical autonomy was under attack. Yet, he was relentlessly prosecuted, jailed for 22 days, and stripped of hospital privileges and board certification, all for prioritizing informed consent and patient safety. The federal case was riddled with jurisdictional flaws, suppressed evidence, and procedural violations. Still, Dr. Moore was undeterred. Then, on July 12th, 2025, just 5 days into the trial, Attorney General Pam Bondi dismissed all charges, publicly recognizing the unjust nature of the prosecution. She credited Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and Senator Mike Lee for their advocacy in securing this reversal. This was more than a legal win. It was a stand for truth, ethics, and freedom. Dr. Moore didn't act out of defiance. He acted out of duty, and he was right to take the stand he did. And Frontline Doctors was right to stand with him. Wait until you hear this story, packed with incredible details. I'm delighted to welcome to the show Dr. Kirk Moore. Glad to have you.
Well, hi, Simone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's great to have a chance to talk with you. I know some of the people who watch the Gold Report know you, but I think most don't know you. And I heard about you essentially, I guess first through, well, actually, you emailed me a long time ago. That is true. And then we followed your legal case. We gave you just a little bit of support. You know, our legal team, very little. You really did the whole thing on your own. We don't get any credit whatsoever. But your story is fascinating. So I'm just hoping at first you can just explain like what you've been through the last couple of years in terms of medical tyranny, medical freedom, COVID, and all of that stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, my story in a nutshell is 2020, I kind of think was in line with most what other docs were wondering what this was. I shut my practice down within 24, 48 hours. I had completely done a 180, realized that to me, it was just all fake. And then I started reading and studying, and I found FLCCC, America's Frontline Doctors. I found, I think the guy that had the most profound influence on me initially was Dr. Zelenko, Vladimir Zelenko. So I started treating people. I was at home doing nothing. My office was closed. You know, I was a cosmetic practice, so I was a non-essential part of, the community. And so all I did was just study and treat people. I probably, over the course of, the last 4 or 5 years, I've probably treated, well, I guess 4,000 or 5,000 people. But, for COVID itself, prior to the vaccines, I was probably treating 800 to 1,000 people.
And you know what, Dr. Moore, if I can interrupt you for two, you said a couple of things right away that are super interesting. One that I found interesting is that you figured it out very, very early. You said within 48 hours, you figured that out. I think that that's quite remarkable. I want to talk about that for a second. And the second thing you said that's quite different than most doctors is your specialty is plastic reconstructive surgery. It's cosmetic. The government had the nerve to say this is unessential. That, by the way, was so offensive to me, the government getting to say what's essential, what's not essential. Work itself is essential to human beings. Okay, there you go. But you then stepped out of your lane and started doing essentially primary care medicine. Again, it's not that complicated. So I'm not giving you so much props for doing this hugely complicated intellectual endeavor, but I want to give you props for stepping outside your lane because the primary care doctors were not doing their part. And there were a few doctors who stood up and did this. And why do you think that you were different? I mean, one of the reasons we do these shows is to highlight differences amongst people.
Yeah. Well, look, I had a lot of primary care experience. So I was a flight surgeon in the Navy. So I did my internship in general surgery. I got pulled out. I did 3 years as a Navy flight surgeon, which is basically primary care for a squadron, primary care for the military and all the enlisted and officers in the base that I was attached to. And then I actually continued, and I did 1 weekend a month, even during my training, where I would moonlight in a hospital. So I would leave on a Friday afternoon from my plastic surgery program or general surgery program. I'd fly back to Meridian, Mississippi, which is where my wife was from. And I would work essentially 36 hours straight, and I would make as much money there in one weekend as I did in the whole month of my training.
I did similar, by the way. So.
So I had a lot of primary care experience, so I'm not really stepping that much out of my comfort zone. I took heart attacks and strokes and and all kinds of stuff, headaches, flu-like symptoms, and and everything else. So I was aware of it. Obviously, I hadn't done it in a long time, 20 years. But I was very comfortable. But the thing that really bothered me, which was the part of the reason why things turned around so quickly for me, was one, every study that I could look up about, the vaccine about, COVID and everything else that I was seeing was, look, this is just a viral illness. And why are we saying that we can't treat this? And so that was my first thing, was just kind of like, how do we not treat somebody that has a viral illness? How do we know that it's any different than any other viral illness that people have? Fever, chills, malaise, loss to taste and smell, which happens with a regular flu anyway. And so all of this stuff to me was just primary care stuff. And so the whole narrative, that was my first flag, was just kind of like, we can't treat people. And then shortly after that was, where, every country in the world was doing the exact same thing. Everybody's shutting down. Everybody's wearing masks. Everybody's social distancing. You and I can't agree on having what kind of potatoes we're going to have for our Thanksgiving dinner. And yet we have 208 countries that are doing the exact same thing with the exact same products, taking them off the market, taking hydroxychloroquine away, not allowing ivermectin to be used, saying it's just not efficacious. Look, Anthony Fauci, who's out there talking about that, wrote an article in 2007, 2008 about the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine in the treatment of SARS. And so now all of a sudden, when we had another article out that said there was a 73% homology between SARS-1 and SARS-2, why is it not effective? And there was another article that I can't find any of these articles anymore, but there was another one that said that they took, I think, 10 patients that had survived SARS-1 that had been tested positive, and they tested their blood against SARS-2, and they, and their blood was, they had antibodies that took care of the SARS-2 virus. Yeah. So what are we doing here? We potentially 100% of people that survived that have had it. How do we know that we don't have a lot more people out there that are, immune to it already? So again, there was just the whole narrative just didn't make sense to me. I shut my office down on March 17th, and it's March 19th. So, I was drinking green beer on Tuesday night, and maybe that's what caused me to change my mind. I don't know.
So I love that you were one of the people who turned around very quickly, and what you're describing is you just looked at things logically. I want to tease out for the audience that hydroxychloroquine was over the counter in much of the world.
Right.
So Dr. Moore is looking at that and saying, hey, that's crazy. And the other thing he noticed is that there was such a uniformity of response. And in life in general, we don't have that kind of uniformity of response. And that made him suspicious. I went through kind of the same thing. I was very suspicious. I'd say the thing that made me most suspicious is when people started attacking hydroxychloroquine as not being safe. I
Right.
said, one thing to discuss if you think it works or not. I said, I think there's a ton of data to show it works. But once you start telling me you think it's not safe, then I know that you've drunk some Kool-Aid or some propaganda because, it's been around forever, et cetera. So very good. Good for you. So there you are.
Hydroxychloroquine is, I had very good, I went on 3 humanitarian trips. And so I prescribed hydroxychloroquine for about 200 people. So I knew very well what the effects were, what the side effects were. I'd read about it. I knew, what it was. I mean, the whole thing with the cardiac side effects and the QT interval and all that was just, it was so overhyped. I mean, they were showing pictures of people in the middle of Oklahoma in the middle of the summer with, with jackets on, supposedly overflowing because of the number of people that were in the ER that were taking up the beds from hydroxychloroquine overdoses. I mean, the narrative was just so asinine that for the people that had any common sense, it didn't make any sense.
Right. So I'm just so glad that we just ran through this a bit because I really want to get into the heart of the story, but you have so quickly explained and made yourself obviously a physician who actually cared about practice of medicine and even downstream that, the patients that were in front of you. So on behalf of really, right, desperate patients everywhere, thank God that you were around, like to help treat people. So that's the early treatment part. That's all the lies of the lockdowns and the mandates, all that. But then the shots come. And it's next level, right? People tend to lump them together, but these are two really, really different things.
Correct.
And that's really when you started. That became
Yeah. Well, so that was the third strike for me. I mentioned the first two, right? No treatment, everybody doing the same thing, everybody in lockstep. And then the third one was like, nothing's going to get back to normal until we got to put a needle in everybody's arm. I have a history of vaccines. I had my hepatitis B vaccine when I started medical school in 1989, and I got shingles from it. I haven't had a vaccine since, except for the yellow fever shot to go to Ghana. So I already have this, this kind of, I guess, anti-vaxxer, or at least what I felt was a common sense perspective towards vaccines. So when they started saying that, I knew that was all wrong. I knew that we weren't going to happen. We've had 100 years to get a cancer vaccine. We haven't gotten anywhere. We had 40 years to get a vaccine to AIDS, and we haven't gotten anywhere. So how are we going to get a vaccine to the common cold that's been around for millennia in less than 9 months? So common sense didn't make a lot of sense to me. But I was willing to sit by the sidelines and just tell my patients, the people that I treated, my staff, my family, my friends, everybody, look, you don't need the vaccine. You're going to survive this just fine. The mortality rate is very, very low. As long as you don't have 5 different comorbidities and are taking 6 different medications, you're going to be just fine. Even the data that the CDC put out, the mortality from, the first report that they put out was in the spring, early summer of 2020, which talked about that the only people that died from COVID, only 6% of them died solely from COVID, at least what they were saying. Everybody else had like an average of 2.2 comorbidities. So all of this stuff, again, didn't make sense. But until they started mandating it in 2021, I wasn't going to do anything. But then everybody was in a panic. They couldn't hold a job. The kids couldn't go to school. My daughter was going to be required to have one to go to college. So at that point, I said, okay, I gotta do something. I don't want to hurt. I don't want people hurt. I don't want them. I'd already heard about people being injured. At the end of January, there were 700 deaths that were reported on VAERS alone. 19,000 adverse events. By April, it was up to 1,700 deaths. And so I was just like, no, we can't mandate this. I can't force people to take it. There was rumors that they were going to make it mandatory for kids to go to high school, middle school, and everything else. So I was just like, that didn't happen here in Utah. I know it happened in some other states, but not here. But I said, okay, I got to do something. So I called the Utah Health Department and said, I want to give COVID vaccines.
Wow, that would have made you very popular. I just have to pause there. That is literally stepping into the fire because, wow, I'm so impressed with you for that. That's not a stand I took. It wasn't actually my lane. My lane was like to fight in the legal, so I don't want to necessarily put myself down on that. but I'm not sure that I know anyone else who did it. I know there had to be some because I've run into people who've benefited from such a situation, but I don't personally know any other doctors who've done that. So, wow, good for
Yeah, I
you.
don't either. I know some people that have been prosecuted. I think a couple of nurse practitioners and nurses in New York were prosecuted by their state government, and have suffered the repercussions of it. I know they raided, I think, a nurse's house where she was charging $250 for adults and $150 for kids to get a COVID card. Again, that side of it to me, I didn't charge anybody. I didn't want to make any money. I was just looking at it to take care of my patients.
But by the way, that is the right way to do it. You don't know this. I think some of my audience knows this. This is very interesting. So Congress came after me and said that I was prescribing snake oil and profiting off of it. They said I was selling ivermectin, making a lot of money off of it. Never mind that ivermectin worked. But here's the kicker. I never did. I never sold anything for money. We never did. There were people who went to telemedicine companies. I'm so glad that telemedicine companies existed, but it wasn't us. It wasn't frontline doctors. And really the thing that protected me was, well, I never did anything for money. So that was the lane you were in. So you said, I will go do COVID shots. I'm not going to make any money. And then what did you do?
Well, and so I gave saline shots to the kids that were required to have them in order to kind of go to school and continue with their life. I gave it to their family members that were in the same room with them together, or otherwise I even voided just a needle. I mean, anytime you inject anything in somebody's arm, you always run the risk of complications. And so I just gave people a card. And I, asked them if they wanted it posted to the Utah State immunization system. About half did, about half didn't. We just went on from there.
Let me ask you some practical questions because it's very interesting, just human interest story. So did people, was this anybody who came to you, like any of your regular patients, or was this people that were particularly seeking you out? How?
So that's a good question. I wasn't advertising. I wasn't telling anybody. It wasn't on my website. I think most of the people came to me because they were patients of mine prior to, from me having treated them for COVID, or friends of theirs or family members. My staff, my friends, my family, I would tell, my close friends, hey, who were, calling me or texting me, or we'd get on the phone or go out to dinner or whatever. And they're saying, gosh, my job is going to require a COVID shot. And so me knowing them, I would say, well, if you don't believe in it, again, and as time went on, less and less, fewer and fewer people, wanted to get it.
Were you concerned at all about the powerful elite power brokers getting upset with you, or did it?
Look, I truly felt like I was abiding by my oath. I can't tell you that I would sit down and kind of go through and read through the Hippocratic Oath and read through it again and say, oh, okay, I'm abiding by this term and not that one and everything else. I just felt like I was doing the right thing. I felt like I was first doing no harm. I knew that this was causing harm to people. By this time, we're talking about a year into this whole process, 6 months into the whole COVID vaccine, a 2-month study where they ruined they vaccinated all the control group, so they couldn't follow anybody. It just none of this, again, common sense to me.
Right. I felt we were put in an impossible situation, which is either to follow the Hippocratic Oath or like keep your license. I mean, it was crazy. It was like a catch-22. But so this is really 2021 as you're going through this, and I guess through 22, I suppose. When did you first start hearing? What was your first inkling that the Biden government was going to take action?
When they showed up on my office on January 11th with 10 or 11 officers and confiscated my phone and my office manager's phone. That was the first part that I found out about anything. I heard later that about a week later, I got an email. I'm looking for the email, but I saw about a week later, I get an email from a reputation, website saying, hey, here's an article from heavy.com. We can help you restore your reputation. I never got subpoenaed. I never got any paperwork. I never signed for anything. I found out from that article that we had an arraignment on the 26th of January. That was it.
So they basically, huge show of force. They take your phone and they didn't leave. They didn't say anything really. And then they just leave.
Right. And that was the same day that the indictment was unsealed. So they could have shown up with the indictment and served it on us then. but
By
they
the way,
chose not to.
I just want to share with people like how scary that is. So the government can
Right.
just come in and be like, "Hey, we're taking your stuff." This happened to a couple of congressmen I know, by the way. They were dining in this is in the Biden years. They were dining in DC at a restaurant, and agents were waiting for them outside. And when they were outside, they absconded. Like they basically, I would call it an assault, but they essentially assaulted them and took their phones and everything. And when I was arrested, it felt very similar. In my case, they did have the proper paperwork, but they just disappeared us. It's like overwhelming the amount of force that a government can have if it chooses to have it.
Right.
And your story is testament to how powerful a government can
Right.
be.
Right.
Wow.
And they did that for 18 months or for 2.5 years. From that point forward, it was nothing about a show of force. It was nothing about the processes, the punishment, trying to bankrupt me. They did a really good job. And, again, it's not about finding out the truth. It's not about justice. It was just about proving a point. It was about showing, hey, look, if you're a doctor and you do this and the government tells you that you're not supposed to do that, this is what's going to happen to you. And they show force throughout the 2.5 years. They told me I couldn't talk about COVID. I couldn't talk about the vaccine injuries. I couldn't talk about people and the reasons why they wanted to come in. I couldn't have experts like you or anybody else that was out there, the Peter McCulloughs and Jim Thorpe's talking about the downsides of, the vaccine injuries. I couldn't have any patients come in and talk about their own injuries that they had. And so they were muzzling me. And then right before the trial in July, they did the same thing. They filed 4 motions that basically reiterated, no, you can't talk about COVID. You can't talk about vaccines. You can't talk about anything. And the law, you're a lawyer. Fraud requires intent. At least that's what I understood, right? Mens rea requires intent. They basically said that if I get up on the judge, and more or less agreed with them, said that if I got up on the stand, that I was not going to be allowed to talk about what my intent was, because it was a foregone conclusion that my intent, according to the government, was to defraud them of their vaccine product that they reportedly owned that was in my office.
So so I want to break this down. So you're being tortured by the Department of Justice for more than 2 years, but then Trump takes office. And it's a new DOJ, and you probably were optimistic that the new DOJ would look at the facts differently. But I was a little surprised that your case kept proceeding. I mean, they got rid of the transgender medical mutilation case, fabricated case against
4 days after he got inaugurated, they
and I don't know if you probably do know, essentially a senator got involved. I think what happened essentially is a senator brought it to the attention, and within 24 hours, the whole thing had disappeared. And then your case kept going on. Now, I don't know if you want to speculate. Maybe I'm putting the cart ahead of the horse. So let's get to that in a second. But this is going on for 2 years. And so you're scheduled to go to trial on this. Even though Trump has been in office now for several months, you're scheduled to go to trial in May, I think?
July.
Oh, it was July. Oh, wow. Okay. You were scheduled to go to, that's right. It was recent.
Yeah,
you're scheduled to go to trial in federal court in July of 2025. And you're not hearing anything. You're not hearing boo from the Department of Justice is coming after you.
Well, we submitted our case to the weaponization work group that Donald Trump did an executive order, I believe, establishing it, especially for the January 6th people, where people got pardoned and people got let out of jail that were still in jail without any charges, without trial, without anything. And so we thought that the weaponization work group would significantly look at our case with, like a real discreet eye and realize what was going on. They did look at the case, and then in end of April, they said, well, we're not going to dismiss it. We're not going to intervene. So we're kind of like, okay, well, I guess we're going to trial. I had an attorney from New Jersey who was convinced that, when Trump got inaugurated, he was a liberal guy. He was convinced that Trump was just going to see this case and let it go. I wasn't so convinced. Donald Trump, Operation Warp Speed saved millions of lives. Susie Wiles is the ex-chief legal counsel for Pfizer, as his chief of staff. Pam Bondi had defended, Pfizer in federal court in Florida. I think that, in that respect, the deck was stacked against me. At least that was my impression. And so I wasn't so convinced that, we weren't going to have to go to trial to kind of prove my innocence.
I see. Yeah, yours, I see exactly what you're saying. Thank you for pointing out all those prior connections. I'd forgotten that about Susie Wiles. We all knew, we've been asking Trump to say something, negative about the shots for a really long time. He's just finally begun to.
2 days ago, right?
It's
on
quite
Monday morning. Yesterday.
It's not as though he hasn't been hearing it for years. He's been hearing about this at least from people that are close to him. I don't mean in the world we live in, but people that are close to him. I know for a fact he's been hearing about this since early 22. So
Well, yeah,
this,
I mean, John Rich tells him, because he said
yeah,
John Rich had a video, okay, and John Rich was talking about, because he says Trump outright asked him, "Why am I getting booed at my
yes,
rallies when I bring up the vaccine?" And John Rich said, "I told him, I said,
he did.
so he knew, he knows."
But he knew about it from there were other people that I knew of as early as 22 who knew
Wow.
him.
Okay.
So that's a long time. And, I'm frustrated about it because I think he takes pride in the business accomplishment of Operation Warp Speed. And frankly, I think he should. I mean, he's a businessman. He got the thing off the ground fast. He
Right.
didn't know what he didn't know about science. But my problem is that, like you have to look at the facts of what happened afterwards on the ground. It was terrible. So I hear it. So you were realistic about, maybe this is going to proceed. So there you are in July. Oh my God, July 2025. And you go to trial. And then what happened? So is the government, I'm curious, I didn't watch any of your trials as it opened. Did the Department of Justice attorneys, were they gleeful to get you? Like how?
Oh yeah, they hated me. Absolutely. They would look at me with such disdain when they walk into that court. I was completely and totally the enemy. And they wanted to see me fry. It was, it's just the animosity, the anger, the disdain was palpable. And again, and I didn't understand that. Look, Joe Altman in 2023 told me, "Kirk, you realize that they are actually indicting you for not murdering and not maiming your patients. Do you realize that?" And I was like, "Yeah, thanks for telling me and putting it in such stark terms, but that's exactly what it was." And actually, that was my pinned tweet for, until my trial was dismissed. And that's so true. But they were just all out to, they in their opening statements, Sachiko Jepsen said that I was hiding behind my employees, that I was putting them out there and I was using them as a screen to protect me from being prosecuted, which was a total lie. I mean, I told my employees, I said, "Look, if you guys want to take a plea deal, there is no way I'm going to be able to go into court and say I didn't do this. The only way that I'm going to be able to win this case is by telling people the reasons why I did it." And I was hoping that by that time we would get to a point, and I think we are, and we were slowly getting there. I mean, in that tweet that Trump put out just 2 days ago, I think is evidence of that. And so, for them to make those accusations about who I am as a character and what my motivations were without really ever knowing my motivations, without ever, again, they can't talk to me. But
a couple questions. So you're opening. So am I to surmise that your employees all stood with you, even going to court on this?
So I had 3 co-defendants. One of them stood by me. She was my neighbor. One of my co-defendants took a plea deal because they caught her with some marijuana paraphernalia, and she wanted to go to nursing school. And so they gave her, a deal where it was just, you testify for us, and and they just put her in a diversion program, so she was not going to have anything on a record whatsoever. And then my other office manager, Carrie, actually, that was the reason why I had an additional charge for evidence tampering, because she told them that she told the prosecution that I told her after the indictment to get rid of all the vaccine product that we had, which was a total lie. I didn't even know where the vaccine product was.
Right.
I didn't.
So I just want to mention for the audience, so I wrote a book called Selective Persecution. You can find it on Amazon. And I talk about the pressure to accept plea deals, the immorality of our government institutionalizing a system where we're encouraging citizens to lie. There's really no benefit to society of having its citizens lie. There just isn't. So I encourage people to read that, because the facts are different in Dr. Moore's case, but the process that the prosecutions are going through to get plea deals, to squeeze other people, it's highly immoral, and it is quite systemized. It's throughout the entire system. So it must have been disappointing. I like to get into the human a little bit. It must have been really disappointing.
One other thing about that selective prosecution, which I think was completely immoral on the part of the on the part of the prosecution. The organization that I was asking people to donate to, again, not as a requirement, they asked to donate. So they are donating to an organization. One of the members of that organization is a guy who has a green card. He hasn't received it yet. He's passed all of his paperwork and everything else. But what they held in front of him was said, if you get indicted, you get deported. You don't have to be convicted. You don't have to be, nothing has to happen. We don't have to prove anything against you. Just the indictment means that we're going to put you on a plane and send you back to your home country. And so they held that over his head in order to make him testify against me. And talk about immorality, selective prosecution, and all that. That's beyond the pale to me.
That's actually a horrific story. And what I want to point out to people, and that has nothing to do with the illegal immigration issue. That has to do with the government extorting and blackmailing humans. That is not the government we want to live under. So you are going to trial in July of 2025. No one's rescuing you. Trump's not rescuing you. The DOJ is still coming after you.
Right.
What happened? Like, how did that all change? And how did it all change so rapidly?
We had a couple of really big podcasts before I went on air. So Ed Zoll and Matt Scow from Died Suddenly interviewed me. Shannon Joy interviewed me. Mary Talley Bowden interviewed me right before trial. So all of it was kind of gaining a little bit of momentum. On Monday morning, we had a small rally. My son spoke. The leader, the House Majority Leader here for the state of Utah spoke. A couple of other Congress people spoke. A guy who was running for Congress for the 3rd District spoke. One of the guys that ran for governor spoke, all on our behalf and to help us. So that started the momentum. Ed Zoll came into town. He was following the case. He was posting things every day. He was watching the jurors and everything else. We had 2 full days of jury selection. And so he was posting things and kind of building up momentum. On Wednesday or Thursday, after the trial started, he wrote an article and he basically said, Dr. Moore is on trial for saline shots, for saving people's lives. And Pam Bondi is personally prosecuting him. And that article went viral. Marjorie Taylor Greene picked it up. Thomas Massey picked it up. RFK picked it up. Senator Mike Lee in the state of Utah picked it up. And then that's kind of what got to Pam Bondi's attention. And then Saturday morning, I get a phone call from my attorney who had just gotten off the phone with the prosecutor saying that Pam Bondi was dismissing our case and there would be, a public notification of that in just a couple hours. So that's kind of how and everything went viral. My son had a speech on Friday that has 1.7 million views. It brings tears to my eyes to think that you have to have your 17-year-old son out there kind of protecting his dad. It's supposed to be the other way around, right? But it was just a confluence of factors, social media, everybody reposting things, and just getting it out there. The prosecution did everything that they could for 2.5 years to not have any publicity about this whatsoever. And otherwise, I think this thing would have gone away as soon as the prosecution indicted me.
Right. I just want to remind you, because it might have gotten lost in the deluge, but you might remember. But just for people who follow me, I did a little bit I could, and I think I wrote you at the time. I don't know if anything I said made any difference, and I would never claim to, but I like how you're explaining it. Like, there was a lot of momentum, a lot of people saying a lot of things. I will tell you that I brought your case to the attention of the highest people that I knew. And I guess, I think it was a lot of people saying it. You did everything you could, and then the people around you did everything they could. And ordinary people who are watching this podcast, you need to do everything you can when you see a wrong. I mean, it's terrible that you went through this for so long, but at the end of the day, the thing that turned it around is we the people.
Right.
We the people.
Well, it was people like you, and it was people, look, Ed Markey knows about my case. I know that he personally knows about my case. Douglas Mackey knows about my case, and he knows a lot of people, obviously, with what he went through. We mentioned him before. Dr. Haim, who was the transgender doc and, who had his case dismissed, knows a lot of people. And so he was speaking out. I had a lot of, kind of political functionaries here and and people in the state of Utah that were that were out there. I know a lot of people that went to Washington, D.C. and spoke about my case. Mike Lee was there. My state senator, Kirk was speaking about it. Kristen Chevrier, they were all in D.C. So I know that, behind the scenes, there were a lot of people that were talking about things. And so
I have to just say, I don't like to get too political. It's not exactly my lane, but it is very frustrating that Pam Bondi let this go on. I'm just going to say that. It's just not right. I just got to say that. What do you think? So the citizens of the jury, they're Utahns. You said it took 2 full days to do jury selection, which for frame of reference, that's a long time.
Right.
What do you think would have happened? Your fellow citizens.
Look, I think our case, they were trying to prove, essentially they had to prove 2 things. They had to prove that they still owned the product when it was in my office. And that, that they still had ownership of this product that was sitting in my freezer. And then 2, they had to prove that the value of that product was more than, $1,000 to prove a felony. The only document that they submitted, they claimed that the vaccine was worth a penny. So out of 2,270 doses, at a penny a dose, that's only $22.70. So they hadn't reached the felony threshold on this. And I think that they were really struggling with that. And then in addition to that, we were fighting, how do you own something when you've paid a company for that product, and then that company then uses another third party, and in Moderna and J&J's case, they used that company then used another third party to then deliver the product, when the liability, had there been something that happened to that product, was upon those 2 other agencies. In other words, the government wasn't going to replace it if the truck caught on fire when they were trying to deliver it to my office, or if McKesson's storage facility happened to have, an electrical shutdown and their freezers broke. They were responsible for it. And so then how is it? So they were trying to say, essentially, they turned it over to these guys. But then when it showed up in my office and I took delivery, they still owned it. And I don't think the jury was buying it. I really don't. I tell this story, Simone, on Friday afternoon. I thought we had a really good case. I was up until 1 o'clock in the morning, kind of going, look, I'm a smart guy, but there's some smart people over there too. I think 2 of them went to, Ivy League schools. They're not dumb. But I'm biased. So what is it? So I'm reviewing everything. I'm going over all my notes. I'm going over things, and I'm just sitting here going, I don't think they've proved their case. I got up again at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm sitting out on my deck with a cup of coffee and, and going through it again. And then, 4 hours later, I get that phone call. I was worried, but I also thought that we had really pushed back on their narrative. They brought Gary Disbrow, the head of BARDA, and he was their second witness. They spent a whole day with him, or combined with the cross. But they couldn't bring in the contract, because the contract was a DOD contract with Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J. And they wouldn't put the contract into evidence. So they flew this guy all the way over from Washington, D.C. They put him in about a hotel for 2 days. I don't know what they had to pay him to get here. I don't know what it was, but I mean, it wasn't cheap. And yet when they presented his case, they had no exhibits for him to go over. All they could do was just kind of get him to say, well, yeah, it was more than $1, is what the cost of the product was. But they had nothing to show or prove, because they didn't want to put that contract into evidence, because there's so many things in that contract. I never saw it. It was attorney's eyes only. But when they tried to first submit it, it was redacted. And we were like, you're not going to submit a redacted contract.
That is actually fascinating. So I want to spend a few minutes just wrapping up. So there's so many things that you said here. One is, you gave us a lot of legal detail. People forget that these legal cases really come down to just these crazy legal details that you don't hear about when you hear about the headlines. To the extent that you've heard about these headlines of Dr. Moore, it was that he absconded with, and he took government vaccines and made money off of them, or whatever they said, or it was a COVID fight. And actually, it really comes down to, it was so interesting how you said it. It's essentially like a contract dispute. They weren't even the contract holder, essentially.
Right.
They couldn't even show the value of the item, which is actually, I just get a kick out of that as a lawyer, because you're right. It all completely turns on these details. And in fact, in any normal case, there wouldn't be a case. There is no case, right?
Right.
There's no case here. There's actually no case here. I'm a little bit encouraged, that this happened in Utah, and perhaps you would have prevailed in Utah, thank God, as opposed to my situation in District of Columbia. What are your take home messages? Because I always like to encourage people that they can do more in their daily life. From your perspective, prior to 2020, you were just, you're having a good life. Obviously, you're a doctor, you went to med school, residency, you worked hard and all of that. So in that sense, you're not ordinary. On the other hand, you're just like an ordinary guy, and you're like, but you're seeing something happen that's wrong. And you said, no, the buck stops with me. I want to keep encouraging people towards that. So do you have any words, on that?
Well, look, yeah. So when all of this started, I thought us as a profession and everything else, I thought we were all rowing in the same direction. Okay. I thought we were all out to take care of our patients to the best of our ability. That has by far and away been my most disappointing part out of all of this. We have 1 million doctors in this country, and probably you and I can come up with maybe 50 to 100 names of people that actually, push back against, this whole narrative. That's such a small percentage. It's nuts. But we can push back. My case got dismissed because of people like you, people like me, people that retweeted, people that kind of went out there, people that were, were helping us, people that showed up at our hearings, other people that were talking behind the scenes, that were doing things. So we all have an ability to do it. I think what we need to realize is all politics is local. And I think that there's a lot of things that we can do locally with our local city councils, mayors, county councils, health departments, and school boards and those kinds of things to try to make a difference and get the right people. We have an apathy in our society right now that is just astounding to me, because we think that the government is out there and has our own best interests. And I think if there's one message here, the message is only you look out for you. And, you are the best person to kind of determine what's best for you and your family, and don't believe that anybody else is going to do that for you.
There's a Henry David Thoreau quote that said, if you don't think of yourself, others will think for you, but not of you, right? So they'll make the decisions that are best for them, but not best for you. Very well said. Dr. Moore, you are, I just want to say, it was very heartbreaking for me also to watch our profession. You said it well, you thought we were all rowing in the same direction. My dad was a doctor, and just to know that doctors didn't care really about their patient, they just were following their paycheck or orders or whatever they were following. I do think it's maybe more than 50 doctors, but it's an unbelievably tiny number. I think doctors were worse than the average American, quite frankly, which is unfortunate. But you said it well, and you are an inspiration both to the ordinary American citizen and also within our profession. This is what a doctor should be. A doctor, he wasn't looking for fame, he wasn't looking for recognition, and he wasn't looking to pick a fight with the government. But literally, he was seeing patients being forced. He wasn't even you weren't even taking a stand when the shots came out, right? Which was, you and I are very much in the same lane. You want to do a bad decision, go have at it. What you can't do is force another person to do it. And when they started forcing people to do these shots for their jobs, for their mortgages, for their livelihoods, that's when we took a stand. I can't speak for the American people, but if I could, I would say thank you on behalf of the American people, and thank God that you prevailed, and you will fight another day, because you know what? You're going to be in my foxhole.
I appreciate it. And, I'm happy to be in your foxhole. Voltaire said, we're all guilty of the good that we did not do. So that's one of my favorite quotes.
I love it. I didn't know that, and I'm going to co-opt that. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Moore, and have a wonderful day, and we'll talk back with you another time. Check back.
Okay. Well, anytime, Simone. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me on the Gold Report, where we inspire you to be 10% more courageous. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time.